you.
Okay, great. So I guess we'll just jump straight into it. Could you tell us a little bit about the event that happened in 2005 with San Marin and the basketball game, just to get some background about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we were playing, this would have been 2005, and it's on the varsity basketball team. We were playing an away game at San Marin. And yeah, I told this story originally in the context of changing the Drake name.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because, as we were playing, like, during a game, what you hear is just like, it's just this wall of sound, right? This wall of sound. You're not really hearing these individual things normally. You're sort of just in your zone. But the N-word that's an exception to that rule. And it just pops out, right? So I hear the N-word coming from the student section.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can't do anything about it. You move on. I remember being in the car afterwards, and my mom had come to the game, and I'm driving with her back home, and she asks, did you hear the student section? They were calling you the N-word. And I told her no, because I didn't want to talk about it. And at that point, it felt like, it was something at that point that you kind of expected. San Marin, certainly at that time,
Mm-hmm.
kind of had a history of racism.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it wasn't something that I wanted to go into and dive into or acknowledge really at that time. And what brought me back to it was that name change, because not only at that time was I being called the N-word by the student section, opposing student section, but I had felt at that time that my school, Drake, was a school that had my back, that that was more of a model of inclusivity, where that kind of thing wouldn't be accepted. What I didn't know at that time was that I was literally wearing the name of a slave trader on my chest.
Yeah.
And so that whole entire atmosphere, not only having that on a slave trader across my chest, being called the N-word, and also many of us as African Americans were also carrying the last name. My last name is Johnson, which is the plantation owner's name. We're also carrying a slave owner's name.
Right.
And so it's sort of everything in that moment is sort of giving you an identity of slave, and it's, and just this dehumanizing moment looking back.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that moment.
Did the school do anything afterwards regarding it in 2005, or did it really kind of just fade away?
No, absolutely not. No, it faded away. I can't know for sure whether they heard it, whether if whoever in the administration from Drake was there. I'm not. I couldn't be sure. I know that I personally couldn't miss it.
Yeah.
There's just no way that it could be missed by me. I would hope that that's kind of the assumption from everyone there, but obviously it's a chaotic atmosphere, and I think just I think that there are certain things that as someone who's Black might just kind of stick out, and things that interact with me a bit differently. So
yeah,
I definitely don't think anything was done by our school or San Marin as well, as far as I know.
Yeah, totally. So as a student, like growing up in Marin, how did you feel being a person of color? Did you feel like there was like more bullying or racism towards you than you would have had if you maybe grew up in a different place? Do you feel like it's like especially bad here?
It's different. I think it's just different. Like my father came to Marin when for I believe his junior year in high school. He moved from Louisiana, from Baton Rouge, over to Cordera and started going to Redwood. And at the time where he left, it was just after integration. So he was there for like the first year or two when the schools got integrated into the South. And obviously there was just old style racism down there during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Black folks fled for that reason, almost sort of like refugees in their own country, right? Leaving the South to hopefully go to a place that's more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
But what he says now is that, when he moved here, as bad as the racism was there, it was worse for him here.
Wow.
And the reason is because it's just this more kind of covert and insidious kind. It's just a different style. Instead of folks saying things to you outright, a lot of times it's folks will give you a look, or they'll walk to the other side of the street, right? And obviously, I grew up in a place where majority white. I had very few folks of color in my high school or class, and a lot of those folks kind of dwindle out of the system as you go from your freshman year to your senior year. They just disappear, from expulsions, from from not getting the grades, whatever it is. Maybe you start out with 10 your freshman year, and then by the time you're a senior, maybe you're one of maybe like 3, something like that, and so I literally had 0 Black teachers when I was at Drake.
Yeah.
The curriculums are very white centered, especially white centered. And so you're getting all of these, you're getting all of these ways where there isn't a place for you, right? There's nothing that reflects who you are. And so it's just this different kind. It's just a different kind of racism. And, it's not necessarily all that, it was obviously in this instance very overt, but there's just this other kind of uncomfortable racism. And the thing is because it's not overt all the time, you're not prepared for it. When you're in the South, you kind of you're wearing the defensiveness on your sleeve a lot, and you're ready for it. But here you let your guard down, and then when it hits you, it hits pretty hard, because you're just not prepared. You've kind of relaxed, and then all of a sudden it popped nowhere. And it kind of just makes it this very memorable moment. I'm 33 now, so this was, my life ago. This was 16, 17 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So these moments as high school students, it's not just, confined into that space and that time. You don't forget that.
Yeah.
Those dehumanizing moments.
Totally.
So why do you think that Marin as a whole breeds so much racism? Because as you said, it's been here for a long time, but why do you think it's like so much worse in Marin?
It's I think it's I, I think it's a lack of knowledge of history. So, for instance, I think folks believe that Marin is a segregated place, which it is. You know, with Marin City, you've got the canal, and then you've got these very rich, affluent white areas. I think folks believe that that's kind of happens by accident. You know, it just kind of happened to end up that way. Um, you know, rather than having those influence of racism, including redlining. Obviously, I used to be a real estate agent, and within the deeds, there's what's called CCNRs, and what those are basically folks that own property can write in these covenants, conditions, and restrictions that basically say if you break any of these, what can happen is that the property can be returned back to me. And what you see still to this day in a lot of CCNRs is you see racial discrimination. So you see folks will put into their CCNRs, this property is to never be owned by someone Black or someone Asian. Now they're not enforceable now because we had the Fair Housing Act, I believe, in 1968. So it's not enforceable, thankfully. But because it's not enforceable, a lot of times it's still kind of, you still see the remnants there. There's just no reason to take it out because it's just not enforceable. So even down in San Anselmo and Sleepy Hollow, if you look at some of those CCNRs, you can still see the racial discrimination. So I think that's one part of it, is just not knowing how things, not connecting history to the now. And I think that the other part of it is proximity to oppression. And Rachel Cargill is one of my favorite authors, speakers, etc. Puts this in three different ways. She says it's about 3 steps. That it's about knowledge, it's about empathy, and it's about action. And so if you don't have the knowledge is hearing folks' stories of their oppression. It's doing the work to see how your actions affect other people. Okay, that's the knowledge part, and how folks are affected by the racial situation in society. And if you don't have that, then it's going to be really hard for you to have empathy, which is the second part. If you just have no exposure, right? Yeah. If all you're reading is white authors and not BIPOC authors, if everyone in your circle is white and you're not getting exposed to other perspectives, other cultures, other people, if you're sheltered in that way, then it's going to be very, very difficult for you to empathize.
Yeah.
And if you can't empathize, then it's going to be very difficult to conjure up the energy that you need to then do that third step, which is to act and to do something about it, right? So I think a lot of folks are stuck on that knowledge part, you know, that they need to kind of go out of their way, out of their bubble, to dig deep and find these stories that are out there. And make sure that they're knowledgeable about folks in other situations. And that will then give them, presumably, the empathy required them to act.
Yeah.
Okay. So what advice would you give to students who maybe come from these more sheltered bubbles that aren't people of color, but want to support those who are and face racism and discrimination in a school setting or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has to be. I like framing the issue in terms of whiteness and what white folks should do. I think it's their burden, not the burden of folks of color.
Mm.
And I think that's a problem that we run into a lot, is that folks of color are expected to tell and retell their stories in order to make white folks feel enough, to make that action happen. And that's work that needs to be done on their own, right? Because as you're telling your stories, there could be that level of trauma, and it's just it's just creating more work for those BIPOC when the stories are out there, right? And so I would encourage folks to to dig deep. I think that it's a really good idea for folks to just stop reading white authors for like a month and do like a 30-day challenge of reading Black authors, read Indigenous authors, read LGBTQ, folks with disabilities, and just do like a 30-day challenge where you're only taking in those other perspectives, because folks have taken the time and opportunity to write books about their experiences, and they're out there. So it's just a matter of folks going to that work that folks have poured their heart and their life into, and engaging with that work, and not just reading it and setting it aside, but actually reading it with the idea in mind that this is not just a perspective, but this is then homework for you to do. You need to internalize, and then you actually need to take this and put something into action. Also, I think, joining, there's a lot of really awesome orgs out there that have sprung up. And I think just, if you're looking for for places to start, there's plenty of folks out there doing work in terms of police-free schools, plenty of folks out there doing work in terms of getting ICE out of Marin, anti-racism work. There is just all over, now is a really good time. Everywhere you look, there's folks out there doing work. And so it's a perfect time for people to just step in, get their feet wet, and the folks within those organizations will put you to work. There's always a Zoom to fill. There's always a petition, to write. There's always, an email to a school board or to Marin County Board of Supervisors or Marin County Office of Education. There's always something productive to do that really doesn't take a lot of effort. A lot of the things take, folks will give you a template and it takes like a minute. All you have to do is on your phone. But it all matters. It all matters. And I think for white folks to also lend their voice, not only amplify the voices of folks of color, but also lend their voices to the school board meetings, and speak out in favor of policies helpful to the BIPOC community. I think is really, really important. I am a huge fan of the idea that I believe that all kids should be involved in movements. I think that should just be a thing, because even just what I've learned in the past year or so doesn't get taught at all in school. You lots of times you learn about basic US government, but you don't learn how to change things if you are being underserved, or you're seeing a friend within the system being underserved, they don't really teach you how to change your or their circumstances locally, who the players are, between these school boards, principals, county supervisors. They don't tell you how to gather up organize, get 10, 20, 30, 50 folks together for a cause. They don't tell you how to put forth proposals to policy, and you learn that more so until they get that curriculum in. You learn a lot of it by doing it, and so I think it's a good thing for all folks, high school age, to just get yourself involved. It's not too early, and you learn so much along the way of, if you want to change things now, well then now you have, the knowledge and the connections too, of how to do that.
Totally. All right, our last question to kind of finish it off is, if you could go back to that basketball game in 2005 and have a conversation with the students from San Marin that said that to you, what do you think you would talk to them about?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Oh man. I would say, yeah, I mean, it would be a longer conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, it would definitely open up a space, to go through the issues. I mean, it's tough at that age because folks want to be, I guess they think that makes them like the cool guy. I think in our society in general, I think that one of the things that we're taught makes us feel better is being on top of someone else.
Yeah.
And I coach basketball now, and this is something I struggle with a lot, just in terms of kind of like our competitive society instead of it being more of a cooperative and communal society. And competition isn't something that I necessarily want to be teaching, is winning at the expense of someone else losing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think kind of like our society sort of revolves around that. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what I would do is tell them how what they said impacts me.
Mm-hmm.
I would try to explain the weight that word carries, for me and my ancestors, and try to come to an understanding based on, and hope that the knowledge of how I feel matters.
Right.
But I think ultimately it's difficult because it's an environmental, it's the whole environment. It's you feel okay to say the N word if the environment makes it okay, and it has to do with parenting. It has to do with other students and friends not calling it out. That has to do with the tone set by the administration and the school.
Yeah.
Back when we were kids, the big thing was, like homophobic remarks. Used to be like the real big thing, the cool thing to do when you were in middle school. And I remember a group of us were summer going into middle school, and I think one of us, said you're gay or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
and one of the folks at Drake heard it.
Mhm.
And this is like a senior at Drake that just happened to be, I think we were somewhere in Fairfax, and they came up and they're like, if you say that at Drake, like you will not be, that's like completely unacceptable. Like you will not be accepted by any of us, not me, not anybody.
Mhm.
And then certainly from our group, you did not hear that any other time
Right.
ever, because someone was laying it down of, this is wrong, this is unacceptable. We have folks in our community that this hurts, and we're not going to stand for it. What you thought is a cool social norm is not. And so, as a kid, you're saying, okay, whoa, here's the difference in, where I should be and where I am. And, and so that made it easy for folks in our group to change very, very quickly. So I think it's a lot is just kind of like the environment and seeking out those stories from those folks affected as well, and folks doing their own work and seeing where their own biases are. I think that's where the heavy lifting needs to come.
Totally.
I just have one last question, another one. Hypothetically, if you did speak up after that event, how do you think that would have changed San Marin and Drake, and how the schools deal with racist remarks like that today? Because I know a student recently spoke up, and NUSD released an equity statement regarding those experiences and things like that. So do you think something like that could have happened earlier if you had spoken up?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the biggest regrets you have is not speaking up when you should, certainly for yourself, but also for in the future. How much would that have affected folks for the past 15 years had you just said something in the moment? But there's also things that get in the way of that, right? You're a very small minority there.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot to be accepted to begin with. And you want to cause as little trouble as you can. You might be the one that somehow gets in trouble, so I've had situations like that I remember in third grade when I got called the N-word for the first time. I got into a fight with that kid, the only fight I've ever been in. And I got in trouble, so, and it was like, and, I mean, so I think that it's tough when it's on the onus of the person that, is receiving. But I definitely think that it's super important to speak out. And what I've certainly learned since that time, being older now, is that when kids speak up about something, like a lot of folks stop and listen. You know what I mean? When kids are talking about, hey, we've got, racism, we've got homophobia, this experience happened to me. There's a lot of folks that will just like, that's a good time for adults to just shut up and listen. You know what I mean? So I think that it's super duper valuable for students to speak out when things are happening. That way folks can respond, but they need mechanisms where that can be done safely. If you can do that, sometimes it's helpful for that to be a mechanism where you can do that anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
And because you don't want to get the blowback from other students, you don't want to get retaliation. So it's got to be mindful of keeping that student safe who's already been kind of through a traumatic experience, make making sure that they're safe from that extra blowback that could come, could come in a physical form that next time. Yeah, I think it's super important, but again, the mechanisms need to be there to do it safely.
Thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Anytime. Yeah, thanks for having me and reaching out. It's awesome. I'm glad you guys are doing a story about racism, taking up the issue. It's awesome.
No pressure if you're not okay with this, but I wanted to ask you if you'd be all right with it if we posted the video of the interview on the YouTube channel that we have for our journalism class, because I think that it would be really interesting for students to be able to watch it.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. You got it.
Cool. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. Well, good luck with the story and also with the distance learning as well.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Cheers, y'all.
Bye.